6 months ago, I purchased this guitar for less than $200. It's been my main guitar for recording and playing live ever since, and after putting in hundreds of hours on it, I feel confident in saying that this is the best budget guitar on the market for metal guitarists. But what makes it so good? And more importantly, what are you missing out on at its paltry price point? Let's take a look and find out. As a longtime guitar player, I enjoy a high quality instrument as much as the next person, and it's really easy for me to get caught up in the trap of always looking at the really high-end boutique instruments that cost more than my car is worth. But as someone who also has bills to pay, it's hard to ignore when a good deal comes around, and that's why my eye was caught by Harley Benton guitars quite some time ago. For those unfamiliar, Harley Benton is the house brand for Thomann Music, the largest music retailer in Europe. They're mainly known for creating inexpensive clones in the most popular designs out there, Strats, Les Pauls, Explorers, and the like. But they also have some more unique offerings, including the higher end and heavy metal appointed Amarok line and the headless Dullahan. Harley Benton has been working hard this year to add new options to their line. However, for most of us, the most exciting announcement this year is the addition of this model, the ST-20 Active. Aiming to give some nice heavy metal appointments to a very traditional body style, this immediately caught the eye of players like myself who recognize its similarity to a very particular signature model from a big name company. With a sleek, blacked out aesthetic, a simple control scheme, and most importantly, a pair of aggressive active pickups, this guitar offers everything necessary to the budding metal player without any of the extra frills or appointments, and most importantly, the extra bump in cost. I have to admit, when this guitar was announced, I was very excited. It ticked every box that I was looking for, and I'd already had prior experience with several other Harley Benton models, so I knew the quality of what to expect. But my excitement went through the roof when it finally hit the Thomann website, and I saw that it was hitting the market at an extremely manageable $120. Like, I actually had to sit there and I had to wrap my head around this idea. A guitar with active pickups for $120? Wait, it's how's that even possible? What kind of black magic are you conducting? So without even a second thought, I placed my order for the guitar the same day that it came out. And even with international shipping fees and import charges, I still end up only paying $200 for this guitar to arrive to me here in the United States. So when it arrived, I initially wanted to record a review of it, but of course that didn't happen. And here we are 6 months later, and now that I have had plenty of time to sit here, work with it, record with it, and see what it is and isn't capable of, I feel extremely comfortable in explaining everything about this guitar, and exactly what it should mean for you. So in this 6-month review, I'm going to go over the specs of the guitar and how it feels, offer you sound demos for everything that you're going to want to hear, let you know its strengths and its shortcomings, offer up anything that you should change on the guitar, and most importantly, offer you alternatives in case this doesn't quite fit your fancy, but you want to find something else to pick up at the same price point. But before we get into the specs, let's hear a quick word from today's sponsor. Nah, I'm just kidding. There are no sponsors for this video. But if I got you, or if you want to consider supporting the channel, hope you'll consider hitting the subscribe button down below. I've got some more stuff coming up here in the future, and it'll help you keep an eye out for it. But most importantly, I would just appreciate it. So here we are with the ST-20 Active, and I'm not sure if you can see it in the camera shot here, but it's got some signs of wear in it. There's a couple of dings right up here. I think there's a chunk missing somewhere in the back. One of the dot inlays actually fell out on it, and I never found where it was at, but it adds character to it. But let's go ahead and do a quick specs rundown here before we get into some tones. The body of the guitar is made out of poplar, which tends to get a bad rap as a cheap wood because it was used a long time ago in Chinese and Korean made guitars. But if it's good enough for Steve Morse, it's good enough for me. It's a little bit on the brighter end of the wood spectrum, a little bit closer to swamp ash, I'd say, but it's not particularly lacking in any one place. It doesn't feel as barky as mahogany or as anemic as basswood can tend to sound, and most importantly, it's a fairly loud sounding guitar. It's kind of on the soft side though, so if you're aggressive with your instruments and you play very high energy live shows, that is something to consider. The neck is pretty standard Strat style, made out of maple, 25.5-inch scale length, 42mm nut width. The nut itself is made out of plastic, so it's not necessarily great, but it does the job. Fretboard, though, is made out of roseacre, which might throw some people off. It's one of those woods that came out of the CITES regulations when everyone stopped using rosewood because it was endangered. But roseacre is just thermally treated maple, so it's a maple neck with a maple fretboard. Very along the lines of a traditional Strat. As I previously mentioned, 22 fret neck. Doesn't state on the page what size they are, but from feel they seem to be medium jumbo. Standard dot inlays. The neck profile is pretty good. It's a little bit thinner than your usual Strat style, so a little bit more in line with the kind of modern guitar feel. And the fingerboard is a 12-inch radius, so a little bit flatter, once again aiming for the slightly more modern Strat style market. And ultimately it feels really good. You can dig in with those nice bends, you can voice some of those wide chords without accidentally muting your other strings, especially if you got these big old knobbly fingers like I do. And even if you're not a fan of Strat style guitars, it plays very comfortably. Tuning stability is handled at the headstock by a set of 6 die-cast tuners. They're not locking, they're not from any fancy brand, but they get the job done. I haven't had to worry about any slipping or having to replace any of them yet. What's ultimately more exciting for tuning stability is the hardtail bridge at the bottom. This is a hip shot style hardtail bridge, and from everything that I've compared it to, this seems to be the same bridge that Harley Benton uses on their high-end Amarok guitars. It's well machined, there aren't any sharp burrs or edges that are going to get in the way while you're palm muting, and it's incredibly comfortable to play. I would see absolutely no reason to swap this bridge out for anything name brand. It's that good. The not-so-secret weapon of the guitar, though, and the main reason it's so interesting, is the pair of active pickups that come stock in it. These are a pair of HBZ active pickups, which are the same ones used in Harley Benton's own SC-1000 guitar, which is based on the ESP Eclipse. These pickups are made by Artec, and honestly, for the amount that you're paying, they're really impressive. The neck pickup is Alnico, and it has that nice, round, even attack that you would look for out of a pickup like this. I would compare it a little bit more to the EMG 60 than I would the 85, and it feels very even across the entire neck, especially on the unwound strings where you get that extra little bit of pick attack bite. It is kind of dark sounding though, and it doesn't play very well with the bottom couple of strings, especially if you detune this guitar, which, let's be honest, you're probably going to do that anyway. It does rather well for clean and edge of breakup tones, though since it is voiced darker, it'll trend a little bit more towards jazz than twangy country. But under high gain, it's surprisingly fluid and handles advanced techniques like sweep picking, two-hand tapping, and artificial harmonics rather well. The bridge pickup, on the other hand, is all about aggression. It's a much brighter voiced pickup, and as a result, it can tend to be a little bit anemic on cleans and edge of breakup tones. But when you turn up the gain, it's a very aggressive, very large sounding pickup. It's also a surprisingly clear pickup. You can play wide voice chords under a good amount of gain and still mostly be able to hear every voice. It's not necessarily bare knuckle levels of clarity, but for the amount you pay for the guitar, it's completely understandable. It's also got enough brightness and output to lend some authority to 70s and 80s rock tones. But as I already mentioned, steer clear of the clean tones here. On the back of the guitar are the string-through ferrules for the hardtail bridge and a battery compartment for the 9-volt battery to power the active pickups, and that is it. Now I will admit, when the guitar arrived, it did need a little bit of work in order to get it up to par, and at this price point, it's not too much of a surprise. The neck had a bit of a bow in it, the action was relatively high at the bridge, and it needed proper intonation. Most annoyingly, the low E-string slot on the nut was cut just a little bit too big, and it caused it to buzz whenever you'd play the string open. It still does, and it's something that I have worked around, but it is something to be aware of, and if you're not particularly savvy with working on guitars yourself, you may want to consider taking this to a local luthier in order to get everything up to par. The guitar comes stock with 10 to 46 gauge strings, which played perfectly fine and felt pretty good. I didn't feel any need to change them right away, and honestly, I didn't change them out till about a month ago. They held tune perfectly fine, which is what I would expect from a guitar like this, and I was even able to detune them to my preferred tuning of drop C with no issues. Of course, if you're going to tune lower than that, I recommend bumping the string gauge up a little bit, but if you're planning to stay in standard tuning and only periodically detune, the 10 gauges on the guitar will do perfectly fine. But all things considered, there's a lot to like about this guitar. For $120, the build quality was exceptional. There were no raised frets, there were no runs in the paint, and other than the slightly incorrectly cut nut, I had absolutely no issues with how this guitar arrived. Most guitars at this price point tend to feel kind of cheap or cheesy in one way or another. This feels like a relatively sturdy instrument that you could take out and you could play it live without any issues. The obvious highlight though is the active pickups. While they're certainly not EMGs or Fishman Fluences, you honestly don't need to switch them out on this guitar. Sure, you're missing out on the pickup switching and tonal diversity of something like a Fishman set, but considering a pair of those costs more than this guitar does entirely, you can add a little bit of EQ in post and get an approximation of that kind of sound while getting the whole rest of the guitar along with it. You can't honestly complain about that. But not everything about the guitar is perfect, and for what you end up paying, there are some trade-offs that you have to deal with. The most obvious of these, and the first things that I would replace, are the tuners and the nut. The tuners on their own are fine, especially considering it's a hardtail bridge guitar, but considering you can get a set of locking tuners for $30 to $40, it may not be a bad idea to replace those and just get that extra little bit of security. The nut, however, is a more pressing issue. The plastic isn't necessarily great, and you can get some decent replacements that are either bone or graphite for about $15. Even if you need to enlist the help of a professional in order to install it, the difference is pretty considerable on a guitar of this price. Also, while it's a minor quibble, the satin black finish is kind of bland, considering it's the metal color that seems to be on a lot of guitars right now. I would certainly like to see some more variety in the color options from Harley Benton, even if it's just a satin white option. So by now, you probably know whether or not this is the guitar for you. And if it is, great, I'm glad I could do my part. But what if it's not? Well, there are some alternative options that you can consider, even at this price point. There aren't very many of them, but let's take a look at some of the options you got available. As obvious as it may seem, some of the best offerings around this price point are from Harley Benton themselves. The SC-1000 ups the ante with a bold single cut shape, gold hardware, and a full 24 fret neck. Obviously based on the ESP Eclipse, it's going to cater to the single cut crowd, and you are going to end up paying just a little bit more, with the usual market price going about $150. But it does offer a set neck, distinct flag inlays. It comes in more than one finish, including that nice satin white that I mentioned, and it's similar in appearance to another particularly popular metal guitar on the market that will get eyes focused on. For the players looking more along the gent or progressive metal side of things, Harley Benton has a recent offering they released named the R446, which is pretty similar to the Jackson Juggernaut, with a pointed headstock, sleek horns, 24 frets, a hardtail bridge, and a variety of sparkle finishes. This guitar looks akin to a budget offering from Kiesel or ESP without the massive price tag. I actually have one in my studio right now that I'll be demoing soon, and it seems promising, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. Outside of Harley Benton though, there's not a whole lot at this price point that's really worthwhile. There are plenty of Squier offerings, but those are all on the lower end and are going to need significant work to get them up to the playability of this guitar. However, there are a couple of offerings that I can recommend from first-hand experience. The first of these is the Beretta Special from Kramer. Yeah, it's got that very Van Halen aesthetic with a single humbucker bridge and a vintage tremolo, but it sounds fantastic and it plays great at the price point. It comes in a variety of colors as well, and it's so no frills, you can just pick it up, plug it in, and get straight to rocking. The other one I can recommend is the Jackson JS22. While it also has a vintage tremolo bridge and the hardware is of decent quality, it's one of the few guitars at this price range that has 24 frets. The humbuckers on it sound pretty good for what they're worth, and it's a comfortable player. It comes in a decent set of finishes as well, so you don't have to stick with the obviously metal satin black. Though if that is something you want to do, the guitar does come in that finish as well. Considering that most of the competition for this guitar is coming from Harley Benton themselves, the ST-20 Active is a really hard value to beat. Most companies wouldn't offer active pickups at anywhere near this price point, and especially ones that sound as respectably good as these do. It offers everything that you need and nothing that you don't, and even the minor flaws in the guitar can be patched up for less than $100. But most importantly, I want to know what you think. Did I sell you on potentially getting this guitar? Do you already have it and you have a different experience? Don't hesitate to let me know in the comments section down below. I absolutely appreciate it. If you want to hear more of what this guitar is capable of, I recommend heading over to my main channel and checking out some of my covers there. Basically, every cover that I've recorded since I received this guitar 6 months ago has been recorded using the ST-20 Active, and I think it's done a very respectable job of creating some nice polished productions. I've got more tech demos and gear reviews coming up soon, so be sure to keep an eye out for those. But if you can't quite wait until then, I'd recommend checking out this video right here. I think this will have you covered for the time being.